Good evening, everyone. It's time to start our Tuesday program a little early to accommodate our speaker's schedule. It will be totally worth it. And we have a special announcement from one of our members, Bob, who's sitting right here, who has brought in some absolute treasures. And I understand they're first come, first served, but I think he wants to have a word about that.
I do, and
You need
look,
to use-
I have muted my phone.
Thank you. You need to use the mic.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Bob Spoolhoff, and I am told that after 50 years in geology, starting at Michigan State, by the way, back in '64, I'm instructed that I should part with a few things. And so, I know that it's free to come and hear whatever's going on today, but now I have not cleared this with the powers here, but
It'll be fine.
part of your admission is you have to take something out of my box there. There's a lot of geology from Colorado, from Death Valley, and so on. So have a look and please take something. You will make my wife very happy.
So before I start with the general announcements, I want to acknowledge a special guest we have here. And I want to congratulate Leo Harlan on completing his geology degree. And so and Leo is one of the few people who was on the ball enough to keep applying for our scholarships so we could keep supporting him, which is what we want to do. We want more people studying science. So I want to thank the library for the use of this wonderful space, which we get to enjoy monthly. Our next speaker, Dr. Joe Licciardi from the University of New Hampshire, is probably the single most knowledgeable person about the glacial history of Jackson Hole anywhere. He will be doing a talk the first Tuesday of August, which is August 5th. And then Joe will be leading a field trip on the next day, on Wednesday, which will visit many of the things he's talked about. And you'll get to see in person some of these landforms, geologic features, and have them explained to you literally by the world's foremost expert. The field trip will be limited in the number of people. So look for the announcement next month and sign up. I'm sure the field trip will fill. Anything to add to that?
Members only.
Oh, yeah, you have to be a member, of course. So I want to welcome our speaker, Dr. Naomi Levin. And Naomi directs a research group that investigates ecosystem and landscape responses to climate change, which couldn't be more relevant. And ties it into the environmental context for the evolution of Homo sapiens and hominins. She uses field geology and stable isotope geochemistry, which we'll hear about. Naomi has 2 degrees from Stanford in the BS in geology, BA in anthropology. Her master's is from the University of Arizona. Her PhD, University of Utah. And for the last, I want to say 8 years, you've been at the University of Michigan in various positions. Before that at Johns Hopkins University and postdoc at the California Institute of Technology. Numerous awards. I won't mention all of them, except the Subaru Outstanding Woman in Science for GSA. Who knew? And numerous papers. If I went through them, she wouldn't have time to do the talk. So, Naomi, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me here. Can you guys, is the mic working here? Can you hear it? Great. Okay. I am excited to just be in this space. I love being around other geologists in a place of amazing geology. And I wanted to just start with a little bit of why I am here in Jackson. So I teach at Camp Davis, which is at the University of Michigan Field Station, that just up on the Hoback River, which you can see right here. It's a field station, so I'm teaching environmental science there now, but I just wanted to just tell you about it a little bit. And if you have questions about it or want to understand what we do there, I'm happy to talk. And I know this is a great, the geologists at Jackson Hole often ask folks who are teaching there to come down for a talk. So I'm really happy that I can make it. But anyway, these are some just screenshots from our website of various, it's actually, I think all of these photos were taken in the last couple of years. You probably recognize some landscapes or where folks are. But just a little bit about it. It's a field station that's been on the Hoback since 1929. It started as an engineering field station and the geology department took it over. Right now, we teach intro and upper level classes in environmental science, geology. I mean, it really started as our geology field camp, right? Which most of us who have geology degrees have done, but we've really expanded it for environmental science, ecosystem science. We have an energy and the environment course. And what's really important is we teach intro students out there. So I actually have students right now who basically have no desire to learn geology or anything, and they are getting more of it than they want. And hopefully they know now that they want it. But it's a residential program, so which is really nice. Students who have never camped before, we were just camping in the blizzard conditions in Yellowstone. So it's a really unique opportunity because most field stations are actually for upper level students. But I just wanted to make a plug if you've got questions, because we're always the faculty who teach out there. Some have been teaching for decades. Some, like me, have only been teaching for a couple of years, and we're super eager to interact with folks locally in any capacity. So if you're so I'm just happy to have these kinds of interactions. We are field stations old, so we're like, we've replaced the faculty cabins, the students' cabins. Now we have our original mess hall, which is getting redone, and actually we have our conditional use permit right now, which is basically if we take anything down, we have to rebuild only in that square footage. So we're trying to come up with like very creative uses to actually add some environmental science lab there. So actually we can have students doing some chemistry, which was not the initial intent of this field station, but it was just basically mapping. So anyway, that's a whole effort that we're working on there. And a big component too is we have a lot of people who have never been camping before, who don't come from a culture of being outdoors. They're from southeastern Michigan or from the Detroit area. So a lot of our work is trying to increase access to the sciences and specifically the field science. So a big thing that we're thinking, we rent out we lend out a lot of gear. We have training programs to focus on camping. So when people get here, they feel more comfortable. So lots of different kinds of ways that we're sort of rethinking field education. So anyway, that was an aside, but if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Okay. My topic is basically thinking about climate change and human interactions going back in time. And this was actually and so what I'm going to talk to you about today, and we'll see how far I get because there's all this stuff to pack into. But this concept of this Anthropocene, which many of you guys probably know, is in terms of when humans have become the dominant force of nature on Earth and of change on Earth. And when you basically place it, so this is time on a log scale, so 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, going back to millions of years. And this question is, and these are the correlative geologic ages, but this question of, human environment interaction and when does it start? And I would actually wager that I think by nature of being humans is we're interacting with our environment and we're engaging our environment in some way. So there's many, many things that you could talk about here, and I teach whole classes about this. But really what I'm going to focus on about is this initial of this human origins, right? And even before our genus Homo, and sort of how do we even think about this, our relationship with climate and really our relationship with environment. And I hope that at the end of what I say today is that you really think to understand our relationship with climate, we really need to understand our relationship to our local environment, because that's how we perceive and interact with climate itself. Okay, so what do we mean by human? This is a great, I'm going to do a bunch of, even though I'm not a paleontologist, talk a lot about our family tree, just because to understand human origins, you have to understand and relationship to climate change, we need to understand the human origins part a little bit. But this is from a great interactive from the Smithsonian Museum. Has anyone been to the National Museum and the Human Origins exhibit? It's actually so cool because it actually has a huge climate change component. It's a phenomenal exhibit. So if you're in DC, And you wouldn't necessarily expect it, but it's all about climate change and human origins. So it's a really great exhibit, but they have a lot of online resources. So here, what we're talking about, there's talk about 4 main groups, this Ardipithecus group that existed between 6 to 4 million years ago, Australopithecus group, these are the southern apes between around 4 and 2 million years ago. This is our genus Homo, and then this outgroup called Paranthropus. And we'll talk a little bit about a lot of these. I'll use the word hominin in this talk, and you might be like, what are you talking about here? I am going to basically refer to everything that is our split from chimps anywhere after 6 to 8 million years ago. What's notable, so this is our, this is the taxonomy, but what's notable, and when you think about it, every organism that I'm going to talk about is more similar to us than we are to chimps. So if you see a chimp at a zoo or you look at a video, you're like, wow, I can sort of relate to this organism, right? You can look in their eyes and feel like some connection. So everything that we're talking about is you would have felt more of a connection with them than a chimp, okay? So these are really like, literally our people, okay? Homo sapiens is the only surviving species of this lineage, but the whole sort of lineage and sort of group is this, I'll refer to it as this hominid, and that's really everything after that split. Okay, so, but what do we really mean by humans? We can look at fossils, we can look at this, but we can think about what we do. We walk upright, so this is called bipedal walking. We use tools for food acquisition, so this is a big thing, tool use. Other organisms do this too, but we are really good at tool use. We have these large, complex brains. We have language and symbols. We have a lot of different body types. Humans, there's a lot of what we call, just a lot of variation, and we're super social. We care for our infants. We have these really big social networks, okay? So when we think about this in terms of, I think about being human as entirely an environmental sort of response. So you can think of upright walking in terms of flexibility in diverse habitats, right? You can get to different places. Tool manufacturing is ability to compete for resources. Basically, if you can make tools, you can do so many different things in so many different places. Large complex brains, you can respond to environmental change and maybe variable conditions. Language and symbols, you can cope and more easily navigate an unpredictable world. Body types, you can survive in different climate conditions, and social elements just amplify all of these things. And so you can sort of also think about this question of the Anthropocene. I'm not going to answer it, but are humans products of our climatic conditions, and are we Earth modifiers by definition? I think our whole existence probably has been shaped and formed in some ways by this back and forth with our environment, okay? Okay, I'm going to give you some more background, but I just also I know that people are geologists in the room or have an affinity towards rocks, and so I've actually highlighted in this talk, just mostly showing a lot of pictures. This is the Afar region of Ethiopia, right up in here. This is the only exposed aerial triple junction, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I went there as a 22-year-old University of Arizona master's student. Those are 2 of my advisors here. And I've basically been going back ever since. So fell in love with the badland environments and doing this work. A lot of this environment knows if you've been in any sort of, it looks like not as colorful as the Morrison Formation, but it looks a lot like places in the Bighorn Basin, places all throughout the Western US. So this is a place where you would sort of feel quite comfortable. But this is actually a site that I just wanted to start with because it's sort of this link between human evolution and climate change is really important. So this was in the Afar region. And this is a site where we actually found a pelvis. So this is what it might look like. This is literally what the site looks like. It's not very impressive, but something's just sticking out. What happens is then it then gets jacketed, it covered in plaster, and it ended up being a Homo erectus pelvis. So Homo erectus is famous for being an upright walker, and actually Homo erectus ended up leaving Africa and traveling, was found in Asia. The problem with Homo erectus is that it was named after a 13-year-old boy, okay? Which if anybody knows about 13-year-old boys' pelvis and grown women pelvis, they're very different, okay? So this is the first female pelvis of Homo erectus and understanding it. And so this is what it basically looks like. You can sort of recognize the sacrum. This is very unexciting looking. When you reconstruct it, you can think about so Homo erectus, one of these pelvis is basically our genus, and one isn't. Can anybody guess? So Australopithecus afarensis is Lucy, our predecessor, older than Homo erectus. Can anyone guess which is the Homo erectus pelvis? Left, right? Anybody who votes for left? All right. Anybody vote for right? Okay. So left wins it. And left wins it because this female can more easily give birth to a big brain baby. Okay. And it's also, but the challenge is, and this is a classic challenge with Homo erectus, is basically how do you also are efficient at walking bipedally and also can give birth to a bigger brain baby. Okay. So these are these sort of questions. So you focus on this. So the bigger brain baby, when you think about it, this is basically, you know, thinking about language and symbols and complex brains and the social component, right? But but also this is also the same species that was involved in being upright walking. Okay, so your same part of your body has to be adjusting to different kinds of variables, and this is what these sort of things that we think about. And so as geologists at this site, what we were doing is we were taking samples for geochemistry. We were trying to figure out how old this darn thing was. This is Bob Butler, who is a works on paleomag. We were looking at the tephra here. We were basically trying to figure out how old it was and put it into context as much as possible. Okay, so when we think about human evolution and what does climate and environmental change mean for human evolution, we can think about environmental response variables like diet. How do you make, and these are all things that like when you're meeting people at a cocktail party, you would think about as well, right? Like, how do you make a living, right? And that's diet is really like, how do you earn your keep, right? How do you get your calories? At the end of the day, we all get calories because we work and we get money in the bank and then we can buy the food, or if you're a farmer, you can basically get, that's how you make your living. Habitat, where do you live and how extensive is your range? Locomotion, how do you move around? Social structure, who do you hang out with? And lineage, what's your ancestry? So how successful is your group? So this is basically all the things that we actually think about today, but really these are, it's the human evolution components. And then you can think about how climate change would influence all of these things. And in every one of these things, climate change has an influence. So the questions that I tackle are, I think about what's the environmental backdrop to human evolution. I think about how climate change has affected the ecosystems where early humans lived, and how did climate and local environment affect diet, habitat, locomotion, and these relationships among early humans. And one of these sort of questions, I wanted to go back to an old idea. So connecting human evolution to the environment is really an old idea. This is a scan from a 1925 Nature paper, so actually 100 years old, now a little older, because it was February 7th by Raymond Dart. And he was the first person who basically identified Australopithecus afarensis, so Australos southern Pithecus ape, then from Africa. And this was a very revolutionary idea because at this point in 1925, all the scientists were European scientists. Raymond Dart was based in South Africa, and he was saying that human origins are based in Africa. And everyone's like, absolutely not. Human origins must be based in Europe. Okay, and so he was not very popular, but he basically named Australopithecus afarensis, africanus. And in his paper, he wrote, for the production of man, a different apprenticeship was needed to sharpen the wits and quicken the higher manifestation of the intellect. Our scientific papers are not like this today. A more open veldt country where competition was keener between swiftness and stealth, and where adroitness of thinking and movement played a preponderating role in the preservation of the species. And this is where he then quotes Darwin, who says, Darwin has said that no country in the world abounds in a greater degree with dangerous beasts than Southern Africa. And in my opinion, Southern Africa, by providing a vast open country with occasional wooded belts and a relative scarcity of water, together with a fierce and bitter mammalian competition, furnished a laboratory such as was essential to this penultimate phase of human evolution. Okay, woo. But basically, this is like a whole set of research and hypotheses that were set out by Dart and Darwin that we have been chasing ever since. And there's a lot of truth to this, but obviously the sort of the conclusions are a lot more complicated. But talking about climate and talking about this fierce and bitter mammalian competition, that's ecology, right? You know, basically, how are the mammals interacting with each other? So this question is, what are the updates and what do we know after 100 years? And what are the questions? What's the cutting edge? I'm not going to talk about all of this, but this is like my world, right? This is what I do. And it's a very rich dynamic field that is continuing to evolve. So we are still chasing these questions that Darwin and then Dart had set out. Okay. So we have made huge progress in this and understanding these relationships, there's still a lot to do. So when we think about climate, if we're going to do climate and human evolution, just a little bit of a primer on climate change. Many of you may know this, right? But this is a Cenozoic, so the past 65 million years, and this is age going from old to young. This is this oxygen isotope benthic form. So anything that's down here, which is the more positive, but it's an inverted scale, is cooler, and up here is warmer. And you guys can see some, distinctive events. This mass extinction event is 65 million years ago, really a warm period, this Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, very famous nearby in the Bighorn Basin. Permanent ice shows up in Antarctica 34 million years ago, which is an amazing thing. So there was no permanent ice in the Cenozoic for this whole time period. For half of the Cenozoic, there was no permanent ice on either pole. And then the more recent big change is that permanent ice shows up in the Arctic in the Northern Hemisphere 2.6 million years ago. Okay, so this is a Cenozoic. There has been so much work on climate change and understanding this. If we zoom into this last 8 million years, this is what's most relevant to humans because this is one since our split with chimps, okay? And if we just zoom in and think about that, the sort of basic story, this is also from the Smithsonian site, this is that same benthic forearm curve. And what you can kind of see is that, and maybe I'll sort of zoom back here, this time period in which we evolved, it's been the coolest of the Cenozoic, right? We've evolved in a glacial, with ice at the poles, right? The PCO2 has been the lowest, okay? And so we've evolved to, and it's also been extremely variable, okay? So we are evolved as a species to cool conditions and low PCO2. That's when we, that's when we have evolved in, okay? And understanding this story, this brown line is this squiggly line representing global climate. And these are all the different species, and these are different sort of events in terms of that have just been marked by symbols. And if you went onto this website, you can sort of see this interaction. But the major sort of takeaways here is that the human evolution story is a time of dramatic climate change on Earth, when the Earth goes through these massive phases of glacial interglacials, right, that affected the whole greater Yellowstone ecosystem here and Jackson. But these glacial interglacial cycles started to intensify, and there's overall cooling, and climate becomes really variable. Okay, what's happening on the human evolution side? This is another view. This is basically not necessarily relating these different boxes to each other, but those are those same four groups. But we've split from chimps at some point here. Let's see if I can find my splits from chimps. We have tree climbing and bipedalism between 5 to 4 million years ago. We've got evidence of this is habitual bipedalism, which means like, can you just walk on 2 feet, or can you because chimps kind of do it a little bit, or are you really used to and you're really good at walking on 2 feet? There's amazing evidence for all sorts of things of butchery, there's stone tools, omnivory, and then different kinds of stone tools. Homo erectus was the first species, Homo species that basically showed that it traveled out of Africa. So it expanded into Asia and parts of Eastern Europe. And then we see throughout this whole interval increasing brain size. And there's so many different parts of the story that are increasing. So we know there's African, since Dart 100 years ago, we know that there's African origins. That is not disputed. Widespread dispersal multiple times. Our tree is a lot more bushy than we thought. Like there's any one time period, there's multiple hominids, which is not the case now, right? Like we're one, but actually this is an unusual time. Most of the time there were more than one hominid walking around. We had other sort of competitors. A lot of hominids overlapped in time and place, but these new fossils are continuing to, the discoveries are continuing, and we know a lot of this information and all the additional information because people are using increasingly creative techniques to understand our human past. Okay, so how do we make this sort of link? To understand the link between climate change and human behavior, we need to we have this big global climate change, but we need to basically put it into some sort of ecological context. And that's the ultimate frontier. So this is a little bit small. I'll just sort of talk to you about all the different things that we think about. But if you're going to think about climate change and humans, you need to, this is in terms of space and this is time. So, a human or an organism lives just, I'm in this couple square meters right now, and I'm only living in this moment right now, right? And so we might have behavior that we think about in terms of, maybe tens of years and maybe, 1 to 100 kilometers. What is the environmental context of this occurrence where you find a hominid? Maybe you can think about larger time scales and larger spatial scales. What's an ecosystem change? How habitats changed? How ecology changed? And we can do sort of similar time and space things. So we can think about the questions and the animals, and then we can think about what we can get at. Like when you have a recorded fossil trackway, you're literally recording the footprints of those hominids. But we also have all sorts of different outcrops exposures and understanding basin scale questions and continental scale questions and sedimentary cores, okay? So we have many different ways to sort of interact this, get this information. I'll present some sort of information and show some slides of the different scales that I do work at. I do a lot of work in the field, so collecting my samples themselves, putting the samples that I collect in direct context of that hominid find. So that pelvis, where was that found? And what is all of the paleoenvironmental information that we can get from around that pelvis? This is an example of a soil, a fossil soil, a paleosol, a vertisol with soil carbonates underneath a tuff. We also do, so this is something that we get proxy information. We get a lot of environmental information from mapping information, but also from taking samples and taking them back to the lab. This is my lab at the University of Michigan. Many people do these different proxy data sets. The proxy data sets are super creative right now in terms of looking at the leaf waxes, the organics preserved on leaves, and studying the isotopes of those to try to understand what the fossil environments were like. We look at what fossil mammals are there, right? Those are great environmental indicators. We do classic stratigraphy and depositional context and looking at the sedimentology to make these reconstructions. We look at modern analogs. So we try to do as much as we possibly can to paint a picture at all of these different scales. And what's really important is we try to integrate all the information. So instead of just working in our silos, we try to work across disciplines. So I'm actively working with people who I work on carbonate geochemistry, but I work with the organic geochemistry. I work with the paleontologists. I work with the archaeologists. I work with the sedimentologists. I work with the people studying the tectonics. So we're trying to put it all together. Okay, and so these are just some, I've mentioned these already, but we're actively, to do this work, we're actively using sedimentology to reconstruct landscapes, geochronology and stratigraphy to look at the ages of the fossils and plant remains, carbon isotope geochemistry, we look at microbotanicals, so pollen, phytoliths, I didn't put it here, studying soil features. And a lot of, since there's so much interest in human origins, this is like a lot of testing ground. So a lot of creative work gets done here because people are like, what can you do to figure out what this hominid was from, right? What possible thing you can do? So we're always trying to push the limits. So there's a lot of innovation that happens as part of this work. Okay, so in terms of making this climate change connection, the first thing that I'm going to argue is that we actually really need to understand environment. So this is a summary plot of, this is a simplified look at what's happened in terms of Australopithecines. So this was the southern ape. This is also what Lucy's from. This is this outgroup, this Paranthropus. They had these large heads and jaws. And this is Homo, this is us. So over the past 4.5 million years, what this is showing is those are those leaf waxes. Those show increase in carbon isotopes, more open environments. Soil carbonates, this is my kind of data, also shows an increase in carbon isotopes, more open environments. And we also see evidence of more open environments from fossil bovids. So in some ways, Darwin and Dart were right. We actually do see this. We see an increase in grasslands and increase in open environments. So this is the sort of, this record comes from these soil carbonates, these little white blebs in here. This record comes from these leaf waxes. And we can basically tell, we can look at the different distributions of bovids. So these are our antelope, our buffalo, our bison relatives here, right? And as we have that, what we see here is we actually see more of these buffalo as you go through time. Okay, so we see some of these stories. These stories are also pretty simple, but we know that these trajectories are happening in the midst of glacial interglacial cycles. We know they're happening, that these environments are controlled heavily by how water is changing. So as this climate was going between glacial and interglacials, it was manifested in Eastern Africa by the availability of water. But I also want to make note is that Africa is a really big place with a lot of topography and a lot of variability. And the rift was actively developing at this time. So the Afar Triangle didn't really exist as it does today 5 million years ago. So we can tell these sort of simple stories, I would say. But if we only stick to this simple story that was like, Dart was right, Darwin was right, we're going to miss the whole story. We're going to miss actually what's driving all of this variation. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this complicated nature. And so this idea is Africa is a big place. We actually shouldn't expect it to change uniformly to global climate change. And just like today, to understand how climate change impacts a place and people, we really need to understand its impact on landscapes and the ecosystems themselves in which these people interact. So a lot of my work is thinking about this, is actually thinking about these archives and rift basins, getting down into the field and the nitty gritty, and thinking about these heterogeneous environments and how they respond. Terrestrial systems and rift basins are complex, but we're getting to the point where we really can understand how the different parts of these basins respond. We should be characterizing variation. We shouldn't just only tell these really simple stories because we're going to miss the point. But if we can think about the sedimentology and think about how that is going to place a first order control on sort of the response to climate, we can probably predict what's happening, and that's what we're starting to see. And so basically, figuring this out and recognizing the climate trends amidst the variation in the rift is our challenge. So today, with the time that I have, and I'll probably won't be able to go through all of it, but I'm going to show you guys some fieldwork photos because I think they're fun and I think it's interesting to see how the work gets done. And I know probably all of you people are outdoors lovers, so I figured to do that. And depending on how much time we have, I'll talk about the understanding of the diet and hominid diversity at the time of Lucy, which ultimately we need to understand these things to sort of put everything into a climate context. Okay, I know, sorry, the black, it's dark, so you get this sort of visual whiplash. I'm sorry about that. Okay, the geologic setting. So this is where we are. We're in the Eastern Africa Rift. So we know that these Somalia is moving to the east. We've got the African plates moving to the west and the Arabian plates moving to the northeast. And that's why we have what we see today. And I'll spend a lot of the time, I've spent time throughout Eastern Africa, but a lot of time in the Afar region, which is this triple junction where you have three plates moving apart. The topography in turn has responded, and the ecology also has responded as well. I just wanted to show you this. I pulled this off, and you don't need to know all the different pieces of this, but these purple rocks are volcanics. Okay, you guys all know volcanics because you're in this region. I just got back from Yellowstone with students, but the volcanics follow the rift. We've got beautiful tephra and flood basalts and ignimbrates and all over the place, right? So this is the volcanics follow the rift sediment. But the phytogeography, this is like the distribution of plants. It also basically has a similar, it really follows a lot of both sort of a combination of the climate, but also this geology. And then this is also the rainfall regions of how they follow. Okay, so what's important to hear is that you see what we see on the ground is really a combination of them. And this is just, the colors aren't important here, but these are all the different ecoregions in the region today. Okay, so today it's super diverse and we should expect it to be super diverse in the past as well. And actually, when you predict famine in Eastern Africa, depending upon where you are, it's going to be totally different. So this is an important sort of lesson to think about. Okay. Outcrop locations for human origin research in Africa. This is one of the places we basically have a bunch of the Toyota Land Cruisers are these mid-90s Land Cruisers are what we use, and they're great, but you can see the margins of this basalt plateau back here. These are basalt flows here, and these volcanic ashes are here. This is the bread and butter. These volcanic ashes are huge. We basically have beautiful radiometric dates on all of these things, and we can also use the chemistry of the ashes to correlate between places as well. Why are rift basins such great places for recovering fossils? They're topographic lows where sediment collects, right? They're basically, everything gets dumped into them. And they continue, they continue to get deeper, right, due to active plate tectonics and rifting. So they're really great repositories for sediments and fossils. I don't know what I did here. I got too excited about the rifts. Maybe we'll try that. Volcanoes are, can you guys still hear me? Yeah, okay. Volcanoes are abundant, so they leave these ash layers. That's really helpful. And then what's important is that early humans lived and died in them. But let me try this. We can also I'll just tuck in the cord. Maybe this will work. Okay. What's important is that this is only where we have the repository. Our human ancestors were all over the continent, right? Like it's just basically where we have the record. It's not necessarily the only place, but it's just the window that we have, okay? And so that's an important, but it's a pretty phenomenal window that we get. Okay, so I'm gonna dig in and show you some pictures of specifically the Afar. This is the Afar Valley, and here, amazing flood basalts. This is the Awash River feeding here. It's a terminal lake into Lake Abe. But this is where we're going. A lot of the work that we do, there's not very many roads here. We have to use satellite imagery to sort of get out and to suss out where we're going to go. We use some very old vehicles. We work with locals. I'm just showing you, we have to take all of our stuff with us, all of our fuel. We dig local wells. Sometimes we get stuck in these shrink swell clays. The rain is basically our enemy. We basically we go in the driest season. A lot of the time, we're basically just going cross country on foot looking for fossil exposures. But you can actually see these are sort of dipping beds with basalts in the background. We work a lot with our local colleagues. These are the Afar people or nomadic tribes people who have keen eyes. This is their land that we work on. We work carefully with them. Yes, they carry AK-47s. They are warring with their local neighbors for time immemorial. So this is just part of their kit. But they find things all the time. And this is actually a cranium that was found. The toilet paper here is on purpose. The toilet paper is because when you find something in the field, you want to wrap it as easily as you can. Okay, so, but often sort of looking for hominid sites. This is at a site with a fossil foot that I'll talk about if there's time, probably not. But anyway, this is what a lot of sort of walking around on a landscape looks like. Just showing you some fossils. This is a fossil monkey, a fossil elephant, warthogs, suids, people who know their animals. This is a snout of a croc. You find sometimes fossil eggs. These are an antelope sort of horns that are stuck in a tuft, which is really neat. So, oh, here's another interactive. I took some of these slides from teaching. Okay, so what is going on here? And could anybody guess what this is and what we could use it to infer about environment? Was this animal living in a grassy or a forested environment? We have grassy, you were right. Okay, so this was a Pelorovis. This was an ancient buffalo with a horn span of 6 feet. Okay, so there is like, I'm an isotope geochemist. I do all this fancy stuff, right? But you can there's so much information just by the shape of the fossils that you do, right? And so what we're doing is like using all of the information that we could possibly get and putting it all together. And that's what a lot of the teams that I work on do. Okay, but yeah, so stone tools, this is what they look like. This is what some of the earliest stone tools look like. And these are some beautiful finds as well. So this gives you a little bit of a sense. But also just not plain, but classic standard geology that we do to understand landscapes. So you really can't put anything in a climate environment if you don't know, like, well, was it a river or a lake, or was it a braided channel or a meandering channel? We're doing all of this kind of work because you can't build that climate story unless you actually know where you are on the ground. Okay, so and then the sedimentary, we have these intercalated volcanic deposits, which are huge for telling age. So we look at the ashes. The basalts aren't very great for dating, but we also use a lot of magnetostratigraphy. So the magnetic signal is huge. Okay. In addition to I do a lot of the outcrop work, but in addition to the outcrop work, there's a lot of work that's drilling terrestrial records lake cores, and they've been being drilled all throughout. There's more now, but all throughout the rift. These rifts are also creating phenomenal lake basins and these extensional basins that have wonderful records. So there's huge logistical efforts to also create drill cores as well. And so we match the outcrop work with these drill core works, and there's benefit to sort of each. And I'll show you a little bit what these look like. This is a project that I've been involved in that was trying to do both the outcrop and the core work, but this is in southern Kenya in the Olorgesailie Basin. If anyone's heard of Lake Magadi or Magadiite, or I don't know if there's any lake geochemist in here, but anyway, some weird rocks that get formed down there. But this is what a drill rig will look like. And they work around the clock, and they basically have to ship everything in. They pull these samples, they're in these plastic sleeves. That's what they look like when they come out. There's a repository in the University of Minnesota where all of these cores go to. And I think probably some of the records from around here may go there as well. But the samples get split and studied. And this is, it all happens there. They scan for XRF, all sorts of things. Okay. I don't have much time for this part, but I'll get started. So this is sort of, the previous part was just like showing how we do a lot of the things. But what I basically want to sort of talk to you about is thinking about understanding hominid diversity at the time of Lucy. So we're back in the Afar where I've done a lot of work. I imagine that most folks have heard about Lucy. Lucy just turned 50, but Lucy was famous because she was an Australopithecus. I mean, Lucy's really 3.2 million years old, but the discovery of Lucy was just turned 50. But in this group, these Australopithecines, so Raymond Dart was the one who found in 1925 Australopithecus africanus, but Australopithecus afarensis, right? So it's the same species, but a different, same genus, but a different species. So Lucy was found in the Afar, and that's why she's named afarensis. So some of the questions are, this is the genus Australopithecus that comes before Homo. This is the genus that started walking bipedally regularly. So some of the questions are, why did they become bipedal, and why were there were actually a lot of them living at one time. So a little bit of a history, I'll just sort of go through this, but Raymond Dart finds Australopithecus afarensis. They continue to discover Australopithecus africanus, excuse me, in South Africa, and continues these discoveries today. But this was the first the human ancestor identified in Africa and finally accepted in that case. Research discovered in South Africa for a long time, but then work moved into Eastern Africa with the Leakeys, and then even further into the Afar region. And in 1974, Lucy was discovered, and it was named Australopithecus afarensis in 1978. And from the mid-70s to the 90s, there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of specimens of this one species that were found, okay? This species has now been found in Tanzania and Kenya. It was really cosmopolitan. It was everywhere, and it was very long-lived. Lucy, we know Lucy, this one specimen, but it was a really successful species, okay? Lucy was found mostly in this place called Hadar along the Awash River in Dakika. This is where all these fossils were found. This is what those reconstructions, beautiful fossils, amazingly preserved. The longest living and best known hominid that we have, human and ape characteristics, small brain, long, strong arms, curved fingers, upright, walk 2 legs regularly, okay? I'm just gonna go through here. We also have footprints of the same species from Tanzania. These are the Laetoli footprints. So we have not only the body parts that made those two, that bipedal walking, but you actually have the trackways of it as well. So it's a really phenomenal discovery. But there's many questions about Lucy. So one question is, was this anagenesis? Was this one continuous species from its predecessor Anamensis to Lucy to afarensis? Why did this species become bipedal? What's the role of diet on development of bipedalism? And if there was hominid diversity at this time, what explains it, and what implications does it have for human evolution? Okay, I've introduced Hadar. This is another place that I've worked at, Gona, but I want to introduce this place, Woranzamile, because it's a place where, to cut to the chase, Hadar was studied for 40 years, and nothing else other than Australopithecus afarensis was found. And then my colleague, Johannes Haile Selassie, goes to Woranzamile and starts finding other stuff of the same age 30 kilometers away. So this question is, what is going on, okay? And so I'm just going to sort of cruise through here. Lucy, a bigger version, Kata Numu, which means large man, and Afar was found at, so we have Australopithecus afarensis at Woranzamile, but this is the big kicker. In 2012, we published this foot. Okay, this foot has an opposable big toe. Do you think this thing was really well adapted for bipedal walking? No, it's for grasping. I mean, so like opposable big toe, this would be a very different kind of foot than Lucy's foot. So this is the first evidence. This is the same time living amidst the same species that Lucy, that there's 2 species living in the same area within like a couple kilometers apart from each other. Other publications have published different animals with different jaws. Anyway, so there's more fossils are found, and the story sort of gets more complicated. And we've also found these crania that are coming out that are slightly older. And the bottom line of this cranium, and this is sort of what some of the discoveries found. I won't be able to show this video, but this is my colleague, Johannes Haile Selassie, who was at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History at that time, but now he's at Arizona State University. This is what some of these finds look like in the field. So one of the sort of main points of this one is that this is basically, this organism seems transitional between Lucy's predecessor and Lucy itself. So I'm cruising through this a little bit because I want to sort of get through here. But what's important about Woranzamile is that we have lots of different finds that are really changing the story of Lucy. So more fossils of afarensis. Afarensis lived in close proximity to other hominid species in the Afar region. And it seems like we actually have a more complicated story between the origins of what we thought was just an ancestor sort of descendant relationship might be more complicated. So this is from a summary from 2015. And basically the story of Lucy has gotten more complicated. There's more competition. There's more things about. And so part of our questions have been, what is going on? And so I'm just going to go through here, and I'm going to kind of just actually cut to the chase, because I'm not going to, some of the things that we've been able to do is we've been able to understand the diet. of these organisms. And what we have figured out quickly is, let me actually just get through here, is that we can use carbon isotopes to actually understand the diet of organisms. You are what you eat. So, and especially in Eastern Africa, where the grasses look very different in carbon isotopes than the shrubs, we can actually tell by looking at the isotopes of teeth what the animals are doing. If they're eating grasses like a bison or a buffalo would be, right, versus a giraffe or something else. So the question is, are these hominids doing different kinds of things? And if we look at this plot here, we can start to fill in what things are doing. And I'm going to skip through here. This is parenthesis boisei. We know that this was eating C4 plants. Anywhere where we're seeing C4 plants, this is basically starting to eat different resources. So starting to eat grass-based diets, okay? We all eat grass-based diets. I eat corn, I eat rice, like all of our grains are mostly grasses. And when did we start to do this? Basically, we started to do this, the take-home messages is we started to do this right at this point. So right at the point that we actually started to be bipedal, we started to use different parts of the landscape. We started to eat more different things. And our carbon isotope stories sort of tell this. When we analyze species that are just transitional between here, we also sort of see that I'm just going to skip through this. This is actually, if you're in the museum in Ethiopia, when you're sampling hominids, this is what it looks like. I go to Ethiopia and I drill these and I bring them back to Michigan and I analyze them on the mass spec. But basically what we can sort of see is we really, as soon as we have any hint of something that's being afarensis, this bipedal species, we get this origins of this new food, okay? We have actually also started to analyze these are these other species from Woronzamile that we're starting to figure out. And it's looking like they are sort of the Bertelli foot and things that had this very different adaptations than Lucy actually didn't make that shift, that dietary shift. Okay, so I think Lucy was making a locomotor shift, but then also making that dietary shift. Okay. So just to sort of wrap up a lot of what we're sort of learning from a lot of this work, the last part of my research, and I'll just tell you about this is where we're going, is one of the questions is now we know we have different species living at the same time period, trying to understand human diversity at this time period, and try to understand what drives it. And this is a huge project that we're doing, and we're just starting this, but I just wanted to introduce it to tell you the kind of complexity of how we're doing this work. This is a very big interdisciplinary team sponsored by the Keck Foundation, where we've got geologists reconstructing the landscapes and tectonics of Woronzamile versus Hadar, thinking everything about depositional environment to basically what part of the arms of the rift they're in. We're reconstructing habitat using all sorts of proxies that we can, from pollen to phytolith, from different geochemistry, looking at soil morphology. And then we're combining this thinking about the mammals themselves and how they're distributed and what the different organisms are eating. So this work has been going on for several years, and we're just getting to the point of integrating all of this information together. But this question is, why are there different species at Woronzamile and only one species, only Lucy at Hadar? These are very big teams. Actually, this is Milian Magesha, who is currently a TA at Camp Davis, so he's just up the road. So he's working on this for his PhD thesis. But some of our initial point is that basically what we're finding is from the sedimentology, we see that the river systems at Woronzamile, where there's more diversity, are more marginal systems. They're more seasonal systems, whereas the axial system is at Hadar. It's much better watered. We also see that there's, and we also see from our geochemistry and our soil work that this is also a drier environment up here. So probably seasonally drying at Woronzamile versus Hadar, which is much more well-watered. So the geochemistry is matching our sedimentology. And it seems to match. While we have the same species, we have the same species counts in both places. So the same animals are in both places, but they're in different proportions depending upon where we are. So all of this sort of means to say is that we're starting to sort of appreciate the diversity on these landscapes if we basically throw all of our possible tools at it. And we're starting to explain why we have the species distributions that we do, which is really like the first step to even thinking about, we have to do all of this before we can even think about climate, right? And how climate is affecting it. Okay, so in closing, just some conclusions is that I want to make the point that the human origin story is one of ecosystem change and characterizing ecosystems. I've found as I wanted to do the climate puzzle that I actually really needed to do the ecosystem puzzle first and understand what's happening really on the ground at a very small scale. We are integrating lots of different lines of evidence and making a lot of progress on that. And we have a growing number of tools and also people doing this work, and especially also people who are from these places to do this work as well. So with that, I will be happy to take any questions about fieldwork, the science, Camp Davis, or anything. Thank you. And I know I speak very quickly. I'm originally from New York, and I can't help but speak quickly. So you have to if you want me to repeat anything, I'll be happy to. Yeah.
About a dozen years ago, so it's old, but it came out about the time that people were testing their DNA and so forth. And one of the points it made was there were probably 9 different candidates in Africa competing for Eve.
Oh, mitochondrial Eve, yeah.
A bunch of those lines died out till we got an Eve. And I was wondering, in your family tree, where might Eve have been?
I mean, oh, yes, I can. Yeah. So the question for Zoom is, there's been lots of sort of reports about Eve and who is the, and I think there's these stories of mitochondrial Eve, right? And so in this tree, where is she, right? And so DNA only goes back, like, I don't know, some people say they have dinosaur DNA, but there hasn't been there's Neanderthal DNA, but it's really not going back this far. People would love to do it. And this is actually like, these are the kinds of frontiers that people are really trying to push. Like, oh man, would my paleoanthropological colleagues love to get DNA? And currently we just don't know, right? We have such few. So I guess if you think that the Australopiths are us, then somewhere here, right? So that's where she is, right? This is, I mean, what's crazy, I didn't talk about this much. This is a crazy outgroup. I mean, they had these like huge sagittal crusts, these like huge jaws. So probably not those ladies, not that Eve over there, but that's the thought. But that is the ultimate question. And everyone wants to know, who is our real ancestor, right? And most paleoanthropologists who find it say, I have her, right? But we don't know. But the amazing thing, what's happened in the past 100 years, and frankly, in the past 25 years, I mean, this is constantly evolving, is we're continuing to find more fossils. And the important thing is that there's so much variation in humans, right? So you need to understand what is a different species or what's just like variation.
Possums, do you push your family tree back and back and back?
I mean, that's what my colleagues are trying to do. They're trying to understand it, right? They're trying to understand, like, really who is the ancestor. I mean, one of these questions here, and I didn't explain it too clearly because I was running out of time, but one question is, Australopithecus anamensis was thought to be the predecessor to Australopithecus afarensis, but now we're finding it overlaps. So which means like, oh, it was sort of maybe the predecessor, but then maybe some evolved and some didn't, right? You know, so it's just more complicated. And then understanding like, well, what's this one doing over here? And is one who is found in Chad, like on the shores of Lake Chad in an open lake environment. And like, what is that relationship? And was there genetic exchange between them? I don't know. I mean, so there's just lots of questions. So it's a very rich field. And unfortunately, I mean, it's for better or for worse, but there's way more questions and way more people who want to answer them than there are fossils to study. So there's a lot of ideas going around, right?
Can you show this as a traditional family tree, if you will?
I purposely not connecting them because they don't come with lines between them, right?
Okay.
You know, right? So people, right? They just come as fossils. And then the paleoanthropologists have to put them into groups and say, oh yeah, we have, and you know, it's fuzzy in terms of the first appearance date and the last appearance date, but what's the relationship? You know, some people split them, some people don't split them, some people lump them together. So this is a sort of, it's like semantics for paleontologists. I don't know if is there a paleontologist in the room? But, it's like, are you a lumper or are you a splitter? What group are you putting them in, but they don't come with labels or relationships. Yeah. Yeah.
So did I understand you right, when you showed what was a wetter region that had less variety to the drier regions had more thing that was evolving and changing and
Yeah.
creating more species?
Yeah,
It's
that's
almost counterintuitive.
well, but I wonder, this is what we're thinking about, right? Like we're trying to understand it is like maybe they were living in a more marginal environment. Like maybe they were they were sort of eking it out in some place. Maybe it's because they were actually, this is our sort of diagram, is that maybe they were closer to the highlands, right? We don't have the highlands preserved. Like we just have these big basins, right? So, but the important thing is we're trying to figure out, our biggest sort of experiment, we put all this effort into trying to compare these two places where we can have overlap in time. And we were like, all right, is there going to be any difference? And so there was a difference. And now we're at the point, like I was literally just on a Zoom call with my colleagues of like, what did you find? What did you find? We're just putting this together. So we just have to sort of see what the combination of the data say. We're surprised that there aren't any different species. They're all the same species. They're just distributed differently, but they're only 30 kilometers apart. Like they're not that far away, right? So we're just like seeing like, I don't know, like, where are you? Like, I don't know, came from Yellowstone. So are you like in the Lamar Valley or the Yellowstone River? Like, are you just a little bit further upstream and a little bit further downstream? Like, these are the kinds of things that we're now able to get. But that is like the window into the past that we have is like, now we have these two windows, right? And we want to understand, whereas in the past, we only had the big river valley window, which could you imagine how biased our view is if we're like, this is the record. It's like, wait, but just look 30 kilometers away and there's a whole other species that's living there for some reason. And now our challenge is to figure out like why, right? And then what about the situation could support this diversity in hominids so close together? So we're sort of like in the thick of that kind of question. Yeah. Yeah.
You go back one on your slide. So I'm wondering which fossil, which species did Dart find?
Oh yeah, Dart found Africanus up here.
Okay. And where did he find?
In the South African caves, Sterkfontein, I think.
Place up.
Yeah, so all of Dart's finds, so South Africa was the locus of human evolutionary work in South Africa. Oh, and by the way, the South Africans would say that we come from Australopithecus africanus, right? But yeah, so those are cave finds that are in these sort of limestone, there are these limestone caves, and that's where most of you have a chance to go there right near Johannesburg. It's amazing. Very, very, very different kind of geological setting where they're found. Yeah.
Okay, and where is Lucy? Sure.
Lucy is just below. So Lucy's right down here.
So she may actually be old.
She is older than the oldest Africanus. So the problem with the Africanus Dart finds, the South African finds, they've just had a bear of a time because they do not have tephra there. So the dating is really, really hard there. So there could be overlap. So the question is, this is out of my ballpark, but what is that relationship between Lucy and what Dart found, right? Lucy was all the way down in Tanzania. So Lucy was as far south as that. How cosmopolitan was Lucy? But it could also be the problem is that we just don't have the cave deposits at the same time that Lucy was found, to extend, like what was happening at this time in South Africa, right? So we're so limited by what we have access to in terms of the exposures, which is why geology is so important because it's opening up these different windows. But there's just so many, like we have more questions than answers really, but.
So what we're saying is back 23 and 40 million years ago, we had our ancestors all the way from South Africa to Ethiopia and Greece.
Well, yeah, so this is, because this is Chad. Oh, yeah, like we have evidence from our ancestry in South Africa goes back to 3 million years ago, and our ancestry in Eastern Africa or in Ethiopia for sure goes back to 5 to 6. But certainly this sort of thread goes back to 4.3 in Eastern Africa and Kenya.
Last question: when did we really leave Africa?
We left a couple times.
Couple.
Yeah, so Homo erectus. So this one, basically originated in Africa and then was found in Asia. There's sites in the Republic of Georgia. There's sites in China and in Java and in Indonesia. Homo erectus moved like a lot, okay? But then we didn't basically, all of us, our origins are from 130,000 years ago in Africa. So basically Homo erectus became Homo sapiens at some point, right? And then Homo sapiens left again and migrated again. So all of the whole global Homo sapiens origins go back like, I don't know, it depends, between 100,000 and 300,000 years ago. And it's all in Africa. And also the genetic data support that because that's why there's the most genetic diversity in humans in Africa. And language data, it's all sort of supports that, but that's where that comes from. So that's our origins. So, but our intercontinental travel in our deep lineage, it started, you know, between 2 and 1 million years ago. Yeah.
So is there any way to like biodate the bones and stuff you find from them?
So that's a great question. Biochronology is, so the mammals are important. So suids, so warthogs, pigs, evolve really quickly. And so they change really fast. And actually they are the most reliable biochronological datum that we have. And in some ways there has been major controversies from the geochronologists about ages, and the suids have sort of always been like, how old are your suids? At the end of the day, if you have a radiometric date on a tough or argon date, that is the gold standard. And we can get amazing precision on that when you have a really good cyanidine crystal. But if you don't have anything else, boy, do you want to find which suids are there. And there are suid diversity. So there was lots of pigs, many pigs doing different things, evolving very quickly. And that's very helpful because if you can radiometrically date that pig in one place, then you can say, I've got that one. I've got what's called the first appearance datum, last appearance datum. Then you can transfer that information over. So we basically, the lesson of all this work is you use every possible stinking scrap of evidence you possibly can to get all pieces of the story. Yeah, that's an important question. Yeah.
Is the diet evidence based on teeth?
Yeah, I know I scrolled over that quickly, but yeah, so the carbon isotopes of all of our teeth reflect our diet, also your hair as well. So if you eat a lot of Big Macs, which is basically corn, C4 corn, I will know if I analyze your hair. But the teeth, but like, so it's the bioappetite. So it's and we actually analyze, you can analyze the carbonate component, which is like 10% of your bioappetite teeth. And we just measure it on like, of all stable isotopes are measured, or dump it in acid and measure the 13C to 12C ratio.
But when you do that ratio analysis, is it consistent among, like, are all the fossils from Hadar significantly different from the fossils from 30 kilometers away?
No, that's the interesting thing. We're just starting to sort of figure this out. I mean, the bottom line is basically this Australopithecus afarensis is the first thing that's starting to do a lot of different stuff, and they're all doing a lot of different stuff. So it's like our Lucy was becoming bipedal, and what's really cool about this data, which is like, I didn't actually show the data, but I just showed the results, is that at the same time that our ancestors are starting to move around on 2 legs, we're starting to eat different things. We're starting to go from eating more trees and fruit resources to taking advantage of open grassland resources. That it's not this, we're probably eating grass roots and stuff like that, whatever, but we're probably also eating eggs, right? Insects that are feeding on grasses. Like, so it just represents an expansion of behavior. So that like upright walking is it's just manifest in that other sort of expansion of behavior. But
eating animals, where did that happen?
well, we have evidence for omnivory or butchery. We have evidence for butchery, and this is from cut mark bones, which is so cool. It's like I could talk to you guys for hours, but there's like on bones you can actually look at different cut marks and actually see that this is not an accident. This was actually cut. So that evidence is around 3.2 million years ago. So it's after this sort of dietary expansion that we get from the chemistry of the teeth. So there's a lot happening at this point, but that's what's exciting about the isotopes. The other cool thing about the isotopes is that it's recording what your behavior is when your tooth formed, right, in your early life. So your teeth might be adapted for eating one thing, but if you eat something else that you're like evolving towards, your teeth are going to show it. So we've seen this in other studies when we looked at monkeys or different baboons, that behavior through isotopes precede morphological adaptation, which is exactly what you would expect, but we can now start to sort of see it. So other animals at this time also, the humans weren't the only like critters that were also doing different things at this time period as well. So there are these grazing baboons called gelada baboons, and they evolved at this time period. And we can tell, like, if my colleague says, Naomi, I think this is the earliest possible thing that I could call a Therapithecus, and I analyze its tooth, it's eating grasses. like out of the gates. So, and then its morphology developed to show like, oh yeah, that's a definitely big grass eating tooth. So it's all sort of part of this story, and we kind of need to figure out all of these details before we can be like, what the heck is happening with glaciations and climate change affecting all of this stuff? Yeah.
When is use of fire develop, and how does that affect brain size and development of which of these?
Yeah, so
groups
people,
is-
it's such a hard thing. And this is where like these relationships, like how do you detect fire? And not only fire is so important ecologically, right? We all know this, but like it's hard to tell in the geologic record. It's even harder to tell if it's purposeful fire. And so I don't know, people have basically, I think, put fire maybe closer a little bit after 2 million years, but that doesn't mean that that's the earliest evidence for it. That doesn't mean that they weren't using it, right? It also doesn't mean they weren't using tools way earlier, but maybe they were wooden tools. Sure, right? Or sinew, right? Surely they were using that stuff, but we just have the rocks, right? So the fire, we don't know, right? We don't know. And when was food being processed and all that stuff? So we can hypothesize that they might have been using it earlier, but we just don't know. And we don't know when meat eating really started. So we're limited by the data.
I have a Zoom question. If you
Yeah.
can read it for the Zoom audience because they can't see
Okay.
it.
Oh, do I subscribe to the postulate that megafauna extinction was a direct result of human hunting? Okay, so this is megafauna extinction that happened around the world, right? Many of you know in terms of we had in the late Pleistocene, this amazingly rich, like the greater Yellowstone ecosystem was even greater. It was so incredibly rich in terms of ground sloths and lots of mammoths, and it really would have looked like the African Serengeti, but in a temperate environment. And so this question is what was the role of humans? So this actually happened at the same time, very coincidentally, when humans arrived. So this question is, John asks, like, were humans evolved? And it also happened at the same time when there was massive climate change happening as well. And so the evidence is not out on which way it goes, but I would say that I'm going to cut down the middle and basically say that humans probably had it seems likely that things were deteriorating as it was and making it harder for these animals, and human predation probably made it even harder and basically was the thing that did them in. But right now, my understanding is that it's very hard that there's no evidence firmly in one camp versus the other. Hopefully that. And I'm not just trying to hedge, but I think that that's where the data is right now. But I also think that's a fair thing. I think, and this is challenging as a scientist who works in this, we want to tell simple stories, but ecology isn't simple, right? Like, so we have to find a way to communicate this information that doesn't sound like we don't know what's going on, but that in a way that appreciates the complexity of the system, right? And communicates that. Because sometimes I think these simple stories get us a little bit into trouble because then we sort of get blindsided by them. But that's a great example of it, both and, right? I think it could be both and, yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to comment on why Homo sapiens are the only group that's
So why we're the only ones left?
what happened to all these other 50,000?
Yeah, like what happened to the Neanderthals and what happened to all of these? I mean, yeah, I mean, my basic answer is I have no idea. This is out of my league. But I I don't know. I mean, my only sort of sense is that there is something unique about us, that we have this competitive edge about what all we do, what makes us humans, all the different things that we do. And who knows, maybe we were tinkerers in a way and we could basically live in more places, right? We are incredibly adaptable and incredibly savvy critters. And so my take is that we probably just outsmarted something, right? We definitely weren't stronger than Neanderthals. We weren't stronger than these other organisms. I think it's all probably a combination of our brains and frankly also our social components, our social structures. But I have no idea really, but that's my guess.
So thank you very much, Naomi, for a fascinating look. This is a small token of our appreciation.